Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming along today. So the fire evacuation procedure for this afternoon's meeting, there are no fire alarms scheduled, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room, so you go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. As always, this meeting is being webcast live on the internet, and can I just ask everybody to make sure that their mobile phones are turned to silent? Thank you. Okay, I think we've got full house today, haven't we? No substitutes. Brilliant. Okay, any urgent matters from any members? Yep, Councillor Westbrook.
Can I just offer my apologies, Chair, because I'll have to leave at 3:30.
Yep, no problem at all. Thank you. So we go to item 4 now. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of January 2020. So that was the recruitment session. Are we all agreed with that? Yep, perfect. Okay, so agenda item 5 is the health and safety guidelines for members. Unfortunately, Dave Byrne is off sick at the moment, so Sarah Craig has kindly offered to present on his behalf. So this is just a general update following the issue of the health and safety by the Local Government Association on guidance to members. So I think if we get Sarah to present, then we'll have any questions to officers, and then we'll sum up the proposals as we're asked to just consider and comment. Okay, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you're aware, this was something that we discussed at the previous HR committee in November, and this is an update following those conversations. So, the Local Government Association, the LGA, produced the helpful guidance called A Councillor's Guide to Handling Intimidation, which we talked about in November. And to supplement that work, the LGA is facilitating a debate on civility in public life. So, after that was discussed last time, Dave, as Interim Democratic Services Manager, has been looking at the guidance in more detail, and as a result, the report's gone to all members so that they're aware of it. Work's currently ongoing to improve access and content to the member information pages, and as that's updated, that will include links to the LGA guidance. But also the conclusion that we've come to is that information should be part of the member development programme as well, which Dave and the team are keen to address. So the induction and member development programme for 2021 is currently being put together with a focus on the induction session scheduled for the 12th of May. And as part of that, the member induction pack is being reviewed. So what we're proposing is to include information on personal safety for members using the LGA guide as a base document within that induction process and induction pack. Essentially, there's some really helpful information in that LGA guidance which talks about attending meetings on your own, letting people know, etc. So some common sense guidance that's really useful. But I think the key message really to pull out is that if any member experiences intimidation or harassment, that in the first instance they need to report the matter to the police. But also in addition, we would encourage members to notify the Democratic Services Manager and or the monitoring officer, just so that we're aware of what's happening. And this is also something that will be included in the member handbook moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan.
I'm very grateful that this report's come back to us. As I highlighted on Thursday evening, the trolling of us as councillors is an ongoing thing, but it's something that seems to be escalating at a terrible rate too. So I'm grateful and I'm hopeful that with the induction of new councillors and a reminder to us older councillors that what we can expect and what we can want in terms of our social media presence is also there. But as an additional point, on 3.5, the meeting of residents on your own is a particular difficulty, if I say, especially in terms of seeing people on planning issues. Planning is a very emotive issue for most of our residents, and if you cannot help somebody in the immediacy of their request to you, it can get heated. So I would, if that is the case, I would suggest to all councillors they write notes on what has happened. It may be useful in the future. Obviously, it's a safety issue as well, and I would encourage all members when they meet the public individually to do so, just in case something is said or misheard or misinterpreted by a member of the public that could come back and bite you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid. Oh, sorry, my mistake. So, Councillor Gardner.
I think you were expecting this. No, it's a simple one. Actually, it comes on something Ken was saying about dealing with residents. In the induction programme and the development programme, are you including a module on home working? Especially with the move away from paper copies, members are using the computers far more, and there should be guidance on the amount of time you should be looking at a screen, how you're sitting at home when you're working, and basically common sense things like that, which members may not be aware of, which they could do better.
Very happy to feed that back to the team who are putting that together. So I'm aware there's some health and safety information there, and obviously that kind of DSE type information forms part of that health and safety agenda. So I'm very happy to feed that back.
Any further questions? Any comments for debate at all? Or are we just happy to note it? Oh, sorry.
Quickly, I think the underlying thing is common sense, and I think if we don't put that somewhere in the programme, otherwise as a council we might as well not be there, because I think we've got to look at it common sense. You know, I understand with planning things like that, but 9 times out of 10 people are pretty good. I think the only problem we got now is online, because for some reason people go absolutely berserk online because they haven't got a facial. Perhaps we need to actually look what we can do, not we, the councillors, the council can do if we do get a lot of abuse online, especially some of our women councillors. Not very nice, but it's not very nice for anybody. See if there's anything we can do. I'm not talking about prosecution, but I'm talking about reminding the people who are sending it that it's out of line, rather than ignoring it and building a case. That's the only thing I would say.
I agree with that, and in the pre-meet I had with officers, I did raise about social media, and within the induction there will be some training available.
Just to kind of flag that actually existing within the induction is a session around social media, but that is also being reviewed to make sure that the specific angle of how people engage with members over social media and vice versa, and what to do if there are situations, is going to be included. So that social media module is being sort of expanded to include that area specifically.
Councillor Reid?
Thank you, Chair. I think the social media aspect is something that is really worth reflecting, because I think we've all experienced that. One thing I would just flag up, though, is that the advice recommends that if we are suffering from what we believe to be harassment, we contact certain officers. I would request, therefore, that if that happens, would you get a response? Because I did contact an officer in January about some postings attacking me on social media. I also contacted the platform. The platform took it down, but I never heard back from any officers. I mean, I won't obviously name who, but I can offline. I can talk about it.
Yeah, that's not very nice to hear. Okay. Any further comments? Okay, so we agreed that we note the report, but following councillor comments, we look at ensuring members take meeting notes from meetings with residents. There is a common sense approach highlighted in the policy, and then we look at social media and harassment in greater detail than we have done in the past, and then that training is reviewed for the induction policy. Okay, perfect, thank you.
And home working.
Oh, sorry, and homeworking. We can't forget homeworking, sorry. Okay, so item 6 now is the pay policy statement for 2000 to 2001. Sarah will be back to introduce the report, and then if we again have questions and debate. So we've been asked to recommend the pay policy, note the delegation of the head of HR and organisational development, and then just note the existing delegation. So, and then note any other issues. So there's a few pointers there. So I think Sarah can present and then we'll take it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So The report covers the pay policy statement, which has also been included within the papers for 2020-21, and this is for the HR committee to recommend to the council. This is based on the statement for 2019-2020, and actually there have only been two minor updates really from that previous statement, which are detailed in 4.1 of the covering report. So we've updated the section around the job evaluation system just to reflect the current system we're using. And there's also been an amendment to section 6.1. So currently the authorisation rests with the head of HR to appoint people above the bottom point of the incremental scale, and the current pay policy statement doesn't refer to that needing to be agreed with anyone else. So this has been updated, so the authority for that will now move to the executive director with advice from the head of HR and the chief finance officer if required. So the committee was advised in March 2017 that the pay policy statement would be updated to reflect forthcoming legislation around cap to public sector exit payments and the recovery of exit payments. That legislation is still pending. However, just as a reminder that the delegation has already been given to the head of HR and OD to make any changes required by that statutory change. In addition, the local government pay offer for 2020 has yet to be agreed, so the national pay award is still pending. And again, the head of HR and OD has delegated authority to make amendments to the pay policy statement as a result of any national pay awards which the council is contractually bound to agree. So you will note in the pay policy statement it refers to pay award pending. So the pay scales in there reflect the current pay scales because that pay award is still pending. It's also been previously reported here that a number of other issues are around which could impact on the pay policy statement in the future, and those are listed out for you. And these strands of work have been combined into a single pay and benefits review, and there's a separate report on the agenda about that, so I will discuss those later. But just to set the context, the requirements of the Localism Act is that we have a pay policy statement in place, and the statement does reflect all the requirements in that Act. The other thing I do need to draw your attention to is on final review of the pay policy statement, it's come to light that there are a couple of paragraphs which in certain circumstances could contradict each other. These are in relation to incremental progression, so I'm looking specifically in the pay policy statement at section 6.2 and section 8.1. So there's a small number of circumstances depending on the start date of the member of staff where if we applied section 8.1 it would contradict with what's set out in section 6.2 because that's about when you get your first annual increment. So what I'm proposing to do is to delete section 8.1 which would potentially be contradictory and move the other two sections of section 8 in with section 6.2. So the overall policy position hasn't changed, but I'm just removing a paragraph which could be potentially contradictory. I'm happy to explain that more if that's helpful.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. Councillor Westbrook?
If I could ask a question about car allowances. Page 31, 10.4, the council operates a lease car scheme open to employees who undertake business travel. I'm not sure how that works, but are we making any consideration about the climate change emergency there and whether that would be limited to electric vehicles?
So the question of car allowances more widely will actually be picked up as part of the pay and benefits review in terms of those overall payments and how that's adopted. And obviously that pay and benefits review will have due consideration for the climate change agenda as well, because that's now factoring into the decision making throughout the council. So that will form part of that consideration.
Councillor Jones?
I'm new to this committee. I was here when it's kicked off. I think I was the one who actually got it going. I haven't seen any response or anything. Has you been negotiating with a union? And what are they used to sit around the table at one time. I don't know why they don't, because it's part of the workforce. But I just wondered, are you negotiating? Are you running these things past them? What's their response? It doesn't seem that we're getting a full picture, if you see what I mean, getting one-sided. Because what we don't want is problems later on with the trade union movement.
So specifically in relation to the pay policy statement, because the only two changes are the ones that I've outlined from what's existingly in place, in relation to the pay and benefits review, then absolutely we will be engaging with the unions. In fact, I had a meeting with the regional union rep last week where we talked initially about where we are with that review, which is in the very early stages. But yes, they will form a key part of that review moving forward, because if we do make any changes, we would need to be discussing those with them. So absolutely, that would form part of the pay and benefits review.
I looked at the chair, I suppose you're in charge. Do we not have union representation around this meeting? We used to. I just wonder why we don't. Is there a reason?
So during my previous time as a HR chair, they were always here. Obviously, I've just come back into it, but I did raise this point at the pre-meet. They are always welcome around the table. For me, this committee is about the staff, not the councillors. And we used to have joint committees as well, where we met with the unions and staff forum offline to discuss any issues. And I am really keen to get those back up and running. So I'm not sure what happened when I wasn't here, but things will be changing. Councillor Rattigan?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. 9.4 required to sleep in. Where were we expecting people to sleep in within the premises here, and what provisions were made? Is that for ongoing emergencies like flooding or something like that? So just that point, and then I'll come to a second point.
So there wouldn't be an ongoing requirement for employees to sleep in on the premises, so that would only be in exceptional circumstances if that was required.
And the salary, section 15, the salary protection. What is the distance between a redundancy payment and a re-employment? Is it got to be a year? Just wanted to have that clarified, so somebody can't come back in to the council after being made redundant and then step into another job.
So that is covered in section 17.1 of the pay policy statement. So where employees have left the council's employment due to voluntary redundancy or settlement agreement within the last 12 months, re-engagement is considered in exceptional circumstances. But it doesn't apply where an employee was made compulsorily redundant, or if it's voluntary redundancy and they didn't receive any redundancy payment, and that again reflects what's in the current pay policy statement.
Thank you. I asked exactly the same question. So, Councillor Jones, did I see your hand go up? No. Okay. So, any comments now? No. Okay. So, I think if we note that section 6 has been merged with section 8.2 and 8.3, and then 8.1 has been deleted. So we are happy to recommend the pay statement, and we note the delegation to the head of HR and organisational development to update the pay policy statement to reflect legislation affecting public sector exit payments should that become effective during 2020 to 21. We note the existing delegation to the head of HR and organisational development to update the pay policy as a result of any pay awards which the council is contractually bound to agree. And then we also note the other issues and considerations, such as climate change, which could impact on the pay policy statement in future in regards to car allowances. Okay, so I think we move on then to Item 7, so this is the pay project update. And again, Sarah's here to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an item that I understand has been on the work programme for a little while. So having come into post, I was very keen that I provided an update in terms of where we are currently, because I'm sure that would be of interest to members. So essentially, the report in front of you provides an outline of the pay project, summarising the current issues and detailing the key work streams identified to address these. I think in advance of that, it's probably helpful, and again, this has come to the committee before, but I'm mindful that we have different members around the room, in terms of the key issues for consideration that sit behind the pay project. So pay and reward for attraction and retention is really key. So pay is one of our key elements in attracting and retaining staff. And we've experienced significant difficulty in securing staff in skills shortage areas, which has been compounded by a number of these areas having a higher than average level of turnover. And although there may be a number of reasons for this, there's no doubt that pay is one of the key motivators for people in both applying for roles and staying within organisations. Secondly, there's a legal and financial risk. So equal pay challenges are one of the most common and costly challenges for public sector organisations. Whilst there's no imminent evidence that there's any issues pending at the council, it's important to always have in place a robust job evaluation system that provides a defence in the event of such a challenge, as well as internal transparency for everyone involved in employment within the organisation. Having a system that supports flexibility is really key, so we need to have a transparent and fair way of responding to market forces and to additional responsibility payments so that we can attract, retain and reward talented individuals in some difficult markets. Pay policy is also key, so the council has an agreed position on pay which is to reflect the upper quartile, but it's clear from benchmarking and other feedback that that's not consistently the case. And finally, as happens in all organisations, the staff structure has evolved over the years as the nature of the services we provide has developed. As such, it's quite timely that there's a review of the spans of control within the organisation, which can vary greatly. So as a result of all of these key drivers, the overall purpose of the pay and benefits review is to do the following: comply with equal pay legislation and therefore protect, or at least help to protect, the council from potential claims, incorporate nationally negotiated changes to the pay spine, provide a fair and transparent system for establishing pay grade and associated allowances, ensure the council is competitive in the marketplace and able to attract and retain suitably qualified and skilled staff, flexible to respond to market changes, address skills shortages and provide career opportunities, and finally to enable a full review of spans and control across the organisation with a view to rationalising the current structure. So to do all of those things, there are 4 key work streams which are part of this review. That's the introduction of a new job evaluation system to provide a fair and transparent way of assessing the worth of job roles within the council moving forward, and a review of existing job roles in line with that new system as job families, review of the full benefits package including pay benchmarking, a review of spans of control across the organisation, and of course underpinning those 4 work streams would need to be a review of policies associated with pay and benefits. So as relatively new into post, this is something that's in its very early stages, so that's the initial scoping, and obviously updates as we move through this process will come back to the committee for further consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Garden.
When do you think the project will be completed?
So with the full extent of the 4 work streams that we've talked about, which are quite big, this is a sort of 18-month to 2-year project in its entirety. Having said that, there may be elements within that are completed sooner than that, but in terms of the full priority, or full project, sorry, that's the scope that we're looking at.
Councillor Capon.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on item 3.6, where you talk about the point 1 there, job evaluation system. So given the system's age, I can understand perhaps there's some issues around that, but I note that it talks about it not being consistently used, and I just wanted to pick up about why that is and how that's going to be remedied, because you can obviously change the system, but if there have been issues organisationally about it being consistently used, that won't be changing just by bringing in a new system. So kind of any context would be helpful, please.
Yeah, happy to provide that. I think inevitably when you have a system of this nature over a substantial period of time where people become very familiar with the system, there is the potential for writing job descriptions to fit the system that you have and the key criteria that you're looking at. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's happened universally across the organisation, but the potential to do that is there. And secondly, that the factors that you're looking at as part of the job evaluation system that were in place 20 years ago obviously probably aren't as relevant now. So the new job evaluation system will address some of that in as much as they'll have updated factors, and actually it'll be a new system for training. The second part of that is that we need to have more trained evaluators in place, and to have a consistency level, which we don't have within the current system. So at the moment, the individual panel will look at the role and will do the grading in line with the job evaluation system, but we need to make sure with the new system there's a level of consistency as well, so a separate panel look at it across the board and make sure it's in line with what's happening elsewhere. As I say, it's not the suggestion that fundamentally across the board there are problems, but I think there are some inconsistencies over time which we just need to keep an eye on with the new one, and the new consistency approach will help that.
Councillor McKay?
Yeah, just a comment really. It's good to see it using HAYS because that's internationally recognised, and I know that you can send staff to be formally accredited as job evaluators within their organisations. Is that what you plan to do?
So I think in the initial scoping, that's certainly what we've looked at. Final decision hasn't been made in relation to that job evaluation system and procuring that. However, that is certainly one of the ones that we've been looking at. And yes, as part of any new job evaluation system, we would need to make sure that everyone was appropriately trained. And if it's an evaluation system that accompanies that accredited training, then yes, we'd obviously want to make sure that people have the level of training required to administer it properly so that we avoid any issues in future.
Councillor Rattigan?
There's obviously a lot of pay grades and scales within the report that we've seen previously. Do you expect that the review will reduce those down or expand them out?
I don't think at this stage it's necessarily clear that either of those things will happen. I think it's more about assessing across the board and where job roles are sitting within those grades. So it may be that as we move further through, things come out of the project that impact on that. But at this stage, that's not something that is being sort of decided on going in with a view to either reducing or increasing. That's not a kind of key aim of the project.
Any further questions, or we can go on to comments and debate? Right. So we all okay to note the report? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 8 is the HR operations and workforce update report. So this report will provide an update upon key people, indicators and management information to the end of the third quarter, so that's 19 to 20. And again, Sarah to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, members will note there's a huge amount of information in this report, and therefore I'm not proposing to go through all of it because of that. However, I will pick up key highlights, but obviously very happy at the end to take any questions on anything, whether they're areas I've touched on or not. So just picking out some key highlights through, in terms of establishment and turnover, our headcount and full-time equivalent figures are broadly similar to the previous year, with a slight decrease of full-time equivalent staff at this point. We continue to employ broadly equal numbers of men and women with a predominance of full-time permanent contracts. The age profile of our workforce is reasonably stable, with 53% falling within the 35 to 54 age ranges. And our turnover has decreased marginally in 2018-19, and after 3 quarters in this financial year, the indicators are that it's on target to decrease again. And although the turnover rates are not particularly high on overall comparison, the pattern of leavers is interesting. So we've got 15% of our leavers having less than 1 year service at the point of departure. But again, when we've looked at the detail of that, there's no specific patterns to note on that. But if we compare our turnover rates to those nationally, we do benchmark very well. Something that was requested at a previous committee was to look in detail around exit interviews, and that is on the work programme for the next committee. However, I thought it was worth referencing it here as well. So our challenge continues to be people wanting to complete the exit questionnaire that they are offered, and everyone leaving the council is offered the opportunity to complete one. So of the 46 leavers, we've had 14 complete an exit questionnaire thus far this year. And of those, you can see below the reasons. So the biggest reason is personal family commitments, and then there are some job-related ones there around satisfaction, quality of management, morale and work-life balance. And I would like to point out that where we do have specific individual issues that are raised and it's appropriate to do so, the highlights are fed back to the individual service areas so that if there are lessons to be learned, that these can be picked up. In relation to sickness absence, obviously that's something that continues to be a focus for the HR team. So absence increased year on year up to 2017-18, but reduced by 9% in the 2018-19 year. For this year, we've set ourselves a more stringent target of an average of 6.5 days lost, and the sickness rates are running slightly above target at this point. If we look at the breakdown of absence by long and short term, we've got just over half of the workforce, so 54% have had no sickness absence so far this year. And also to point out that where the policy was changed in March 2019, we're not able to benchmark long and short term against previous years because the triggers around those two have changed. You can see the average days lost to sickness in terms of service areas. Now, where areas are quite small, inevitably one person off for a period of time can affect the overall figures, but the individual business partners do look at these in detail for their areas and engage with managers around what we can do to support where there are areas of particularly high sickness. Unchanged from previously, and I think in line with what other employers experience nationally, our greatest reason for sickness is mental ill health, and I'll talk a little bit later on in the report around some of the activities we're doing around wellbeing to address that, because that is key for us to pick up, and as I say, nationally that is the most frequently reported cause of sickness absence. So workforce equality information is very key, and equality, diversity and inclusion is a key priority for us, and we have an action plan which focuses on, amongst other things, increasing diversity in the workforce, and there's a range of activities that are ongoing which support that. So the focus on promoting apprenticeships as a route to joining the council is key, as is engaging with local schools and colleges to promote these opportunities. That's not to say, of course, that apprenticeships are only open to individuals of a certain age, as they're not. However, typically they can be a route into employment from schools and colleges, and we are slightly underrepresented in our 16 to 25 workforce compared to the local population, so that's something we're particularly focusing on. Our extensive staff wellbeing programme, which raises awareness of physical and mental health conditions, also impacts on this. And again, we are slightly underrepresented in terms of levels of disability, or at least reported disability amongst our staff, when compared with those in the local population reporting long-term limiting illnesses. So again, that's something for us to focus on. And we're also continuing to engage with local community forums to gain insight as to how we widen the accessibility and inclusivity of our recruitment and retention practices, and those conversations are ongoing. So our workforce information is required to be published annually in January in terms of equality and inclusion information, and that has been published, and the link is within the report. So as I mentioned, although the number of staff reporting to consider themselves as disabled has remained stable, that is still lower than compared with the wider population. And our number of staff from ethnic minority communities has increased slightly over the last 2 years. But with both of those areas, because the numbers are small, a single employee classification will make it go up or down by a percentage, so it can change quite significantly from year to year. As I referenced earlier on a couple of times, promoting health and wellbeing is really important to us as an organisation, and we promote a wide variety of health-based initiatives which are organised by the Wellbeing Group. So a huge amount took place in the second half of 2019, and again that's listed out for you, but just a couple of highlights. The suicide awareness workshops to help support customer-facing posts was very well received and valuable insight for those individuals. World Mental Health Day in October was something that was a key focus and will be again this year, really just encouraging the ongoing conversation around mental health and enabling that to be a part of everyday conversation in the council. That also included, following that, a training session for members on managing mental health, which I hope members found beneficial. I know was certainly welcomed when it was discussed at committee in November. Also looking at financial wellbeing workshops, council-funded health checks, support for charity campaigns, so a huge amount that's been ongoing in terms of the last calendar year, and into 2020 we have continued that. So very recently we had a session on the menopause, which was attended by 70 staff and managers, attended by a local GP, to talk about this really important area which impacts everyone at some point through themselves, friends, colleagues, family. Also had resilience training, relaxation course and a time to talk event. And again, lots more coming up for the second quarter of 2020, including further Make Your Money Go Further sessions, funded health checks, which have resulted in a number of referrals to GPs, so something that's actively making a difference to the ongoing health of people. Raising awareness of Mental Health Awareness Week, National Volunteers Week, etc. So huge amount of ongoing work in this area, as we recognise that staff wellbeing is really key to the future success of the organisation. Staff engagement is similarly something that's very important, so I'm sure members will be aware that we participated in the Best Company Survey in 2017 and again took part in that in 2019, and the overall score was recently released. So we had 72% of staff respond to the survey, which is above the not-for-profit average, which was really positive, although again something we'd always want to improve on. And the council has again achieved a one-to-watch accreditation status, which reflects a good level of engagement, which is really positive, and of course something we'd want to build on for the future. In terms of gaining the results, we're very keen that we don't just look at the results and they sit until next time. So we are taking those results out to discuss further with staff through a number of focus groups which will be run within directorates to explore the results in more detail and understand if there are particular activities, actions and things that we can take forward from the results so that staff know that their voice has been heard and that we've taken account of the feedback they've shared with us. Training and development is obviously something that's really key, and we continue to invest over £220,000 annually in learning and development, which has been on a whole range of courses, professional qualifications, etc. And again, you'll see the plan development for 2021 includes a huge range of performance-related, development-related and management and leadership-related development for staff. The key focus to us continues to be apprenticeships as a really valuable route into the organisation. And we currently have 10 apprentices in post and a further rollout to recruitment, and we've had 23 former apprentices who've secured permanent roles at the council at the end of their apprenticeship, which is really positive, and again something we'd be really keen to build on in the future.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Westbrook?
Thank you. Pages 52 and 3 give us reasons for leaving, resignation by service area and by length of service. Do we capture this information for grades? Because I thought it might be useful for the pay project work.
So that information is available to us by grade and absolutely would form part of the pay project. If that's something that's of interest, that's something that I could include, because this is a report that comes to HR committee twice a year. So very happy to include it by grade if that's helpful.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. Also on page 53 on leavers, the exit questionnaire seems to be the standard and the one-to-one is offered. I'm used to one-to-ones being the standard and the questionnaires being a fallback position. Is there any reason why it's that way around?
So I think initially it was about us just being keen to try and maximise the engagement we had from individuals, and quite often if people are able to complete a questionnaire, they're potentially more inclined to do that rather than having to sit with someone and go through things if they're particularly concerned. But they are actively offered a one-to-one feedback session as well, so both routes are available. But what the exit questionnaire enables us to do is to have some standard information that we can compare year on year and across service areas as we get more information, whereas obviously conversations, it can be more difficult to have that specific comparable data, so it's helpful to have both, and we do encourage people to do both.
Councillor.
Can I ask, during an annual performance review, are there structured questions around sickness, health, well-being?
On the current format, not specifically. However, that does form part of the general conversation in terms of how individuals are at work.
Councillor Jones?
I was looking at your, on page 55, your graph, and your environmental services seems to be high. Is that the people who are working out in the parks, gardens and grounds staff? Just as one off.
Yes, it would include those staff.
No, I'd ask, which I think would be quite interesting, because as we know, retirement age now has gone up, and those jobs are physically hard. Is there an implication there that we're not doing enough for the older people who are working here? Because on your people leaving, there's quite a few left after 5 years. I'm not saying that they're all connected, but there seems to be where we got people doing physical manual type work. Obviously, I know because I've done it all my life. At certain ages, it becomes harder. Are we making sure we're looking after those people? Because that seems rather high. And instead of, I'm not accusing you of this, but companies tend to frighten the older people when they start becoming ill, especially, especially at the lower end where people are manually working, not in offices.
And I think we're really keen to recognise that actually the types of work that you've alluded to can actually be quite challenging depending on the weather and other circumstances for people at all ages, and actually, people with underlying conditions or anything else that they have, we would want to provide appropriate support throughout the age groups for people in those roles, as well as other roles within the organisation. But absolutely, there would be ongoing conversations with people in that age bracket, as they would with everyone, around what support we can provide for them at work, and that doesn't have an age trigger, because you can obviously have people at all sorts of different ages with all sorts of different wellness levels, for want of a better phrase.
The reason I'm coming back on it is we've looked at it from a different perspective over the years about the amount of staff we got, especially in that area quite recently. And I just wonder whether we actually employ enough people to do the job, and they're putting too much pressure on. I'll leave that one with you. No need to answer, but it needs to be addressed at some time if this sickness level's high. I've worked out in different temperatures, it does affect young people as well as old. But I just wonder sometimes, will we push our staff? We've lost a lot of staff over the years with savings, but I do wonder whether sometimes these savings aren't the savings that we would actually gain on because the sickness rate goes up.
So I can suggest, just for a little bit of background information, a few years ago we did do a review of all the PPE the guys wear. So that's something I'm more than happy to look at, so they've got the right tools to do the job. Yeah.
I would imagine we've got the right machineries and things like that, to be fair. I'm not suggesting you've got people digging roads manually or whatever they do, but I think it's something that needs to be looked at. We always brush over these things over the years. You think most people used to retire at 65 or even earlier, 60 women. Now they're, women now 68, men are 68, and you might get a few getting 66, but that's where we are. I just wonder what the impact is for the organisation and for those people who are having to work that a bit longer. I think it's something we might have to look at a later date, maybe.
Yep, so we can note that and then look to bring it back later on. Councillor Capon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on section 3.5, which refers to resignations, and noting the higher than compared to the others resignation rate in the borough development and implementation strand, and also then noticing in 4.5 that again that strand, the borough development strand, showing negative. Forget the term now. Negative performance. Is there any? I know I'm aware of that. There's been an element of flux in that department, and there've been a number of changes to the teams and the structures and things. I just wondered if there's any indication of impact, cumulative impact on delivery and effectiveness in that area of the organisation, and have there been any lessons learnt from it? Because it seems like there's a few elements there: resignations, sickness rate. There have been some changes. So, is there any learning out of anything that's come to light out of those about how we might approach things in the future? I don't know if my question's clear, but it just feels like there's a few indicators that it's not been a stable area of the organisation.
I think that's something that I'd need to follow up and have a look, so I don't have an immediate answer for you on that in relation to that area specifically. So I think rather than provide conjecture, that's something I'd want to take away and have a look at.
Any further questions or move on to debate now? Comments? Oh, yeah.
You know, possibly in the wrong place with this new virus that's going around. I don't know whether we will be discussing it today, but our frontline staff who deal with people, you know, at the desk and wherever, which is quite a few, and their sickness rate I did look at. Have we got anything lined up for them? Because what's actually happening out there, they're the people who'll be meeting the public more so than others behind desks in the offices. I wonder whether we've got any contingency plans or something for that. No, it's early days in the governments, but if I don't raise it now.
So I would say we're absolutely following all of the guidance that's coming out from central government around COVID-19 and making sure that we're supporting staff by doing that. And actually we are convening a group internally just to look at this issue to make sure that on an ongoing basis, if or when the situation does escalate locally and therefore there's action we need to be taken, that they are in place. But as I say, everything that is being issued in terms of guidance at the moment, we are following and making sure that staff are regularly updated around that guidance so that everyone's got that information.
Okay, so I don't think there's any further comments. So we're all in agreement to note the report. Yeah, but moving forward, we'll look at the resignation by grade, and then further work which we can do offline in our staff forum meetings is the ops work. So looking at people who are working longer and have they got the right support in place. Okay, so next up is agenda item 9. So this is the gender pay gap report. I think if Sarah presents the report and then we take questions on the report and then we can move on to the presentation if anyone's got any queries on that.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Okay, so this is something that would have come to committee previously, so this is something that we're required to publish on an annual basis. So the requirement for us to do that in terms of the relative pay gap between male and female employees is enshrined within the Equality Act, and there's a set of information that we are required to publish, which is mean gender pay gap, median gender pay gap, mean bonus gender pay gap, median bonus gender pay gap, proportion of males and females receiving a bonus payment, and proportion of males and females in each quartile pay band. So the report that Chair alluded to, attached Appendix 1, shows the Council's gender pay gap information, and it's based on the data at the snapshot date of 31st of March 2019. Overall, the Council's in a good position, so the vast majority of organisations have a larger gender pay gap, with the mean gender pay gap for the whole economy being 17.3%. Ours for 2019 is minus 3.23%, the minus indicating that it's in favour of women, which therefore compares favourably with that of other organisations. So that's based on the mean gender pay gap, i.e. the average. In terms of the median gender pay gap, i.e. the middle of all of the levels of pay, the whole economy has a median gender pay gap of 16.2% according to the October 29 figures from the Office for National Statistics, and the Council's gap is minus 12.99%, so again that minus indicates in favour of women. So compared with last year, the gap has increased slightly on both of those, and again the figures are provided. Something also just to point out, the gender pay gap report also refers to the mean and median bonus gender pay gap payments. So although the Council doesn't pay bonuses as such in the term that most people would understand that to be, we do have honoraria within the pay policy statement, as you will have seen, and because there is a potential for that to have a performance-related element, that does need to be declared as a bonus within this gender pay gap. So the mean bonus gender pay gap is £89.39 in favour of male employees, but I would point out there's only a very small percentage of staff who receive an honoraria payment, so again, 1 or 2 members of staff within that can produce a huge change in terms of those figures. Other thing to point out is that the requirement of us as an organisation is just to publish that data. However, we feel it's helpful to provide that context behind the data and in terms of setting ourselves up as an employer of choice in this area. So you'll note at the beginning of the Appendix 1 presentation report, we have some case studies of female members of staff within the organisation and their experience of working here in isolation and also compared with other places they've worked. And I think that's a really positive reflection of the experience of women within the workforce, which the data does represent as well.
Okay. Any questions on the report first, and then we can go into the presentation? I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a look through. No. Anything? So we're happy to note the report, and it's quite nice to see that we go against the national trade or trend, so it's a little bit different. So that's all noted. Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 10 is the flexible working. So again, we've been asked to note the report, and again, Sarah to present, and any questions.
Thank you, Chair. So this is another item that's been on the work programme for a little while. So again, I was very keen to bring this report forward to hopefully address the issues that originally arose to it being on that work programme. So it's really just a brief summary of the operation of flexible working within Basingstoke and Deane. So employees must have a minimum of 26 weeks continuous service with the council before they can make a formal flexible working application, which they're able to do once every 12 months. And employees do that on an active basis, and we have a number of options available, all of which are in use within the organisation, depending on the individual services and areas that staff work in. So those options include a reduction in working hours, changes to the hours they work, including start and finish times, compressed hours, etc., changes to the days they work and or working from home on an ad hoc or regular basis. Also important to point out that we would always take into account the health and well-being of an individual as part of that application process. So for example, if someone wished to work an excessively long number of hours per day, we would obviously want to have a conversation with them around that and make sure that anything that's agreed is not detrimental to their health and well-being. However, the desires and requests of individuals also need to be balanced against us being able to maintain our operational functions, and so there is the option to refuse or request a revision to a flexible working requests based on one of the following business reasons, and again they're set out there for you, and again that's part of it, a conversation that the individual requesting the flexible working would have with their line manager if it was felt that couldn't be accommodated. There are also some options such as ad hoc home working that wouldn't necessarily require a formal application as long as the appropriate equipment is provided and risk assessments are undertaken. That can be agreed. We also have the option to agree flexible working applications on a trial basis to assess both for the individual and also for the service if it's operationally workable for both. The other point really to note on that is that, as you'll be aware, we are in the process of implementing significant transformation projects, including digital transformation, smarter ways of working, and of course there's the impact of the climate change emergency, which we referred to earlier on. As a result of that, this type of transformational activity enables us to support our customers and the organisation more efficiently and effectively and be able to respond to changes in customer demands and expectations. But as a result of that, the projects will inevitably have an impact on the way that staff are expected to be able to undertake their duties, as well as the expectation of the organisation on how these duties are undertaken. The result of all of that being it's anticipated there'll be further opportunities to work more flexibly, where this is likely to become the norm rather than the exception as part of these transformational changes within the organisation.
So, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just picking up on your last point about transformational change and also climate change emergency. Quite a number of companies now, including some local authorities, quite close to us, operate a positive policy of working from home 1 day a week for staff, and staff are often encouraged to actually allocate a day and work from home on a regular basis. So do you feel that that's something that has to wait for that transformational piece, and it's something perhaps that the council can explore. Obviously, given constraints of making sure that frontline staff are available and so on, but at the moment it doesn't seem to be a positive position of the council to encourage working from home on a regular basis.
So I don't think it's necessarily a case of waiting per se, in as much as, you know, smarter ways of working is something that we're having conversations around at the moment, but the idea is that that would be the norm in future. But it's also important that we have the devices available to staff to enable that to happen. So those initial stages are kind of in progress now, really, to get us to that point where we're ready to look at that. And I think the key point is, rather than setting out a specific requirement of X days a week or X hours a week, it's about us getting to the point where we're undertaking the work that's required within the organisation in the way that's most effective and efficient. And that might be working from home, or it might be working from a different office with a partner, or, you know, it could look very different. But I think the key underlying point is about doing the work in the way that makes most sense and is most efficient and effective. And again, that will differ by services, because some of our frontline services, for example, you're not able to do those things from home. So I think blanket operations are more tricky, but I think it's about being sensitive to what we need to do in certain areas.
Councillor Reid?
Thank you. I think what I was looking for was possibly, not necessarily commitment, obviously, that you're not able to give, but certainly an understanding that that might be something that we should be working towards as a policy, a positive policy of enabling working from home on a regular basis for staff members who are able to do that within their roles. And from what you're saying, that still isn't necessarily an aspiration.
It's absolutely the intention. So when Sarah says it's the norm, we know there are some employees who've already indicated under no circumstances do they want to work from home, but equally we're trying to make sure that actually by default we want to enable staff to be able to work from home, to be able to work from an office that maybe is nearer to home if they don't want to work from home. So it is a positive statement in that it's our expectation that all employees, not just senior employees, for example, will have the opportunity to do this, but obviously subject to the service that they provide. And as Sarah says, a lot of that's about us enabling them to be able to do that. What I would just add is that on a service-by-service basis now, where the ability already exists, we do encourage people to work from home, because it's good for your well-being as well as for the climate change, actually, because I try and work a day from home because it takes us a 3-hour journey, so there and back. So actually we do actively encourage it. But obviously it's not available blanketly at the moment. The part of the transformation project will ensure that that's available to all.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you both. I think therefore it'd be nice to have that as a slightly more positive aspiration within the document.
Councillor Regan?
Thank you, Chair. Many years ago I used to work from home, save up work to do from home. But there are occasions some people can't work from home because children, etc., elderly caring roles, etc. So that's being allowed for, as you mentioned. The other thing was the practicalities as a councillor. Nothing more frustrating than emailing somebody and saying, well, I'm working from home today. Can you, there would be means of contacting them by phone? I was talking about senior staff. Will their mobile numbers be given out?
So if they have a work mobile, then absolutely. And I think the point that Sue was making is that part of the Smarter Ways of Working project is enabling people to work from home effectively, and that includes, therefore, people being able to engage with them as they would do if they were at work, but just they're in a different place. So that would be part of that project in terms of whether that's via mobile or transferring calls or whatever that needs to look like to enable people to be accessed at home as they would be if they were at work. But we're not in that position yet, which is where that enabling work needs to happen before we can get to that point. And to address your other point, absolutely take on board what you're saying around some people not wanting to or being able to work from home, which is the point that Sue made, and that's where trying to avoid the blanket X number of days or hours can be helpful, but trying to facilitate it as much as makes sense and still enables us to provide the services we need to.
Councillor Westbrook.
Just one quick question on this. When we are undertaking recruitment exercises, are we actively promoting flexible working when we're advertising the positions?
I would say yes, currently in a limited way, but that's something I would be very keen for us to promote further. So I'm very keen that we extend how we position ourselves as an employer of choice. And I would see moving forward that our opportunity for flexible working becomes a key part of what we can offer that would differentiate us from other employers, albeit we just need to be mindful that where people are in roles where that's less able, that we are sensitive to that as well.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I ask about home visits when people make a request to work from home? How do you know that the lighting, the seating, and all of those health and safety issues are dealt with and are detailed properly?
So on an existing basis, we have the kind of DSE workstation assessments which would be in place and sort of self-assessments in terms of when people are in the office building. And again, that's equally applicable at home. And we do have policies and processing in place now to pick that up. But actually one of the key work streams around smarter ways of working will be policy and process, and that will include how we ensure that the environment at home is equally appropriate to that at work. So we do that now, but I think that's certainly something that we'd want to review in more detail as it becomes even more the norm as to how we operate.
Councillor Gardner.
Member of staff working at home is one thing, but it's very intensely frustrating when you phone up to be told that the member of staff isn't working today because they're on a 3-day week, especially in planning, where very often you do want a fairly quick response on a planning query, which you cannot get when the officer's not there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know that there's a question that I can respond to.
I'm not trying to restrict our policy of allowing people to work a 3-day week, but it can be very frustrating when the officer's not there. So I think we need to find some way to actually be able to answer a councillor's queries in the absence of an officer.
I think, in my experience, I've always gone to that person's manager and they've always been able to give me a quick update.
I think it's a valid. Sorry, I think it's a valid point that if there was some way that as councillors, it might be too big, but to know what officers are in when they actually work, especially senior officers, because usually that's who you deal with, or in the planning department. Maybe a little bit difficult because there's quite a lot of them, but well, I know, for instance, Rebecca, she has a day off, not a day off, she works from home quite regularly. And it's just fine. I think we should encourage these things. But from our point of view, which is if we know they're working from home and it's not that urgent, you can leave it for another day. But we need to know, if you see what I mean. If it's feasible, it may not be feasible.
So, as a rule of thumb, if you're working from home, you're still accessible. So either you should be receiving your calls redirected from work, or you're picking up your emails. So if you're actually working from home, it should be the same as if you're working in the office. So if you're experiencing problems, it's worth feeding those back. In terms of officers that work 3 days a week, certainly as part of looking at flexible working arrangements, that's meant to take into consideration, well, who do you contact then when those people aren't in? Their out of office should be on, and it should give you a clear indication of who you can speak to in their absence. And I'd also say, as part of smarter ways of working, clearly it'll be a much wider issue in terms of how and where do we actually post what the team working activities are from a managerial's point of view, as well as people that are trying to actually communicate with the team. Because actually you could have a team of 10 people with 5 of them working from home. So actually that's part of the smart ways of working in the longer term in terms of how do you know who's where. But certainly if you're getting a message saying someone's working from home and you're not able to contact them, I'd be really interested to know about that. Because that's...
I think I haven't got a problem with people working at home. And I would assume, because I'm like this, I like to push the boat a bit. If I was working from home, I might depending on the job, but you might do 2 hours earlier in the morning and not be there in the afternoon, which they're doing their hours. I haven't got a problem with that. And that's why I'd be reluctant to contact anybody at home unless it was really urgent. But but I think we've got to try and make it easier for staff to work from home. I really do, because you look at our, especially our planning officers, we don't seem to be able to retain them. It's a busy job, hard job, and they're looking for better. If they get offered something better, let's offer it here so we keep our staff. We lost too many senior staff, in my view, and people with skills, but that's just me.
So if I could just respond to that, you're absolutely right. One of the categories around smarter ways of working is we're not necessarily expecting people to work 9 to 5.
No, that's right.
Because people with small children, for example, might do something very different. People that have other care and responsibilities, and certainly some people work better in the morning just naturally than they do in the evenings. So that's why it's really key that we do start to document and find a way in which we can communicate who's working when and what, whether they're actually in, whether they're working from home, and if they are working from home, what their intended hours are. Yeah.
Councillor Reid?
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I've never had a problem with officers working from home. I've never found it difficult to contact them. In fact, most of the time you don't know. You get an email or they'll pick up an automatically redirected phone or mobile. So, and in terms of smarter ways of working, I completely agree. We need to be making this easier. We need to be enabling this. And also avoiding the situation where everybody has to come in here for a meeting all the time. And this might perhaps even, controversially, be rolled up to councillors who don't necessarily have to be here. Speaking as someone who seems to have spent the last 5 years consistently in meetings and then coming away and thinking, what did we achieve by that? It is perfectly possible to talk to someone via Skype, over the phone, and have meetings where you don't all have to be in the same room. And it does make life just much better and easier for everyone. So I think finding smarter ways for the staff to do that. We might perhaps need to just, how can I put it, educate councillors a little bit about how that works and how they can contact people and so on. But that's perfectly possible. And even get to the point, say, where councillors can phone into meetings more than they can at the moment, or Skype into meetings more than is acceptable at the moment. I think that would be really helpful.
Any further questions or comments? No. Okay, so we note the report, but I think it's quite clear from the committee that we've got this aspiration to promote flexible working, which includes working from home, but to also support the staff in doing so, and also with the use of technology, look at people's whereabouts. So, we're not calling somebody who's on annual leave for the day. We know who should be online and who isn't. Okay, so agenda item 11 is minor revisions to the HR policies. So I think at the last HR meeting, before the recruitment one, we had a long list of policies over what we wanted to look at, but a lot of them are updated on a regular basis, so we're just trying to sync at the moment the updates to come to committee to give you the right updates and to have any comments rather than just reviewing them before they're due. Okay, and then Sarah again to present.
Thank you, Chair. So, as per the report, the HR Committee is responsible currently under the Constitution for the approval of key HR policies which have a significant impact on staff and/or cost to the Council. So these are bullying and harassment, capability, disability, disciplinary, grievance, both individual and collective, redundancy handling, sickness absence, staff code of conduct and whistleblowing. As it happens, 5 of those policies are all coming up for review at about the same time, and therefore we have reviewed them. These are the disciplinary policy and procedure, the bullying and harassment policy, capability policy and procedure, redundancy handling procedure, and whistleblowing procedure policy. So 4 of those are currently within the remit of HR and OD, and the whistleblowing policy is owned by Law and Governance. Now, we have made some minor updates to each of these policies. Essentially, those are to enable us to make sure that the policies are really operationally workable, and also we've made changes to make sure that our compliance with legislation is clear. What I would also say is I'm working with the team to create a plan for the review of policies going forward so that we're not in the situation again where 5 of them need to come to the same HR committee. So that will mean some of them will be reviewed in advance of their standard 2 yearly review, but that will enable us to get to the point where we have only 1 or 2 coming to HR committee. So you'll see in the reports I have listed out, and there's a lot of information there in terms of exactly what's been added, changed, removed from each of the policies. So although there are lots and lots of changes, you will see that each of them are fairly minor, but it's just really making sure that the policies are workable in practice. And as I say, all of them will have a more thorough review over the next 2 years, but we will try and space out those reviews so we're only viewing 1 or 2 at a time.
Any questions? Yep, Councillor Jones. Yep.
On 2.6, it says employees can choose to take trade union representative or a colleague, which is standard procedure. On page 121. I just wondered, those people who aren't in a union and they don't want to take a colleague, but can they take someone else who perhaps has got more idea of what their position is, you know, as an individual, a solicitor, or I'm going extreme now, but, you know, I've come across a case a few years ago where doing all that, it was a dispute, but they wouldn't let the person doing all the work in like a trade union official would or a trade union representative would, but they couldn't sit in on the meeting. I just wondered, is there a reason or anything? Should we be looking at that? It's a question I haven't got the answer, but it's one that I've often wondered.
So the short answer to the question is no. As is set out in section 2.6, it is only to be accompanied by a trade union representative or a workplace colleague. That is fairly standard, and that's been my experience everywhere that I've worked previously. I think what I would say is that obviously doesn't stop anyone getting advice or support external to those meetings, but actually it is an internal process within the council, so therefore it's reasonable that we do limit that to recognised trade union representative or a workplace colleague, and especially with an organisation of this size, there are enough staff that people should be able to find a workplace colleague, because we recognise they may not want someone from their own area, but actually we do have a wide staff base that people can then find a colleague from, but it wouldn't be appropriate to have anyone outside of those 2 areas.
Okay, are we okay to note the rest of the policies? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so agenda item 12 now is the employment termination costs for quarter 1 to 3, so 2019 to 2020. We've been asked to note the report, but I'd just like to remind members that this meeting is being webcast. So if you feel that you've got any confidential questions, then please let us know before they are asked. Any questions on them at all? Oh, sorry, Sarah, can you present, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll be aware that as standard we do provide an update on termination costs on an annual basis, so this generally wouldn't be due to come back until the next HR committee in September. However, at the previous committee in November, this was discussed at length in terms of the previous year's data, and therefore there was a request to provide termination costs for quarter 1 to quarter 3, so therefore I've brought this report back in order to do that. So essentially the council has incurred termination costs totalling £62,805.09 in quarter 1 to quarter 3 of 2019 to 20. That will include payments made under settlement agreements and payments in lieu of notice as well. That's really it in terms of highlights, and just to say that a more detailed report will come back to the committee in September, which will cover the full year picture as is done on a yearly basis, and that would be back in the standard pattern of that.
Now on to questions. Councillor Gardner.
I'm not sure that it's appropriate under an open session, but is it possible to know how many payments were made rather than just the total value? And is it possible to know how many of those were redundancies? Or should I wait for the final report?
So the final report will detail the amounts in terms of payment in lieu of notice, redundancy and settlement agreements. But again, as per the previous report that went, that doesn't detail the number of individuals.
If we were to have that in a confidential session, would that be not today, but after the final report?
So I think the concern around that is inevitably, depending on levels of individuals involved, it then, especially if it's at a senior level, would become very obvious who those individuals may be, especially if there are a small number involved. So that is the concern around providing that information.
No, it's fine. Thank you for clarifying. Councillor Reid?
My question was exactly the same as Councillor Gardner's, actually. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones?
There is disquiet, as we heard at full council, about money being paid out to individuals. And I think this committee should have some more information, not on the past, this is the past, but if we're going forward, we want to know why we're paying that sort of money out and everything else. So I'll take it this is what the whole thing started off on. As a new boy, I don't really know where the question came from in the first place, this review. But we do need to know, because the public need to know if we're spending huge sums of money, which we did last year, which is public knowledge. But I don't want to know about the individual or anything else. But we need to know why and if and when these things occur.
So the offer was made by my predecessor at a previous HR committee in November to provide a more detailed briefing, update, training session, determine the phrasing as you will, around settlement agreements specifically. So if that's helpful, I am still very happy to provide that, and that offer was made. I think the point I would want to point out, as in the report really, is that where payments are made under settlement agreements, it is a result of a negotiating process, and it is about balancing the need of compensating individuals for loss of office and protecting the council from future claims. So the amount of the payment that we make is based on legal advice, and that's always external legal advice, and relates directly to the level of financial risk that the council is potentially exposed to if we were to get to tribunal. There is a reputational element to that as well, but the key determinant is around the level of financial risk we're potentially facing as an organisation.
Councillor McKay?
I think I'm right in saying that the policy includes an amount over which the decision needs to be ratified by this committee or elsewhere in the council, and perhaps the answer to some of the recent questions lies in the setting of that limit.
So again, as per the covering report, council's given the opportunity to vote on severance packages over 100,000 before they are approved.
Councillor Rattigan?
Sorry, I've spoken a lot. The figure of £62,805, does that include any pension uplift, or is that just a settlement figure?
So that isn't just settlement agreements. There is some redundancy cost in there, and actually a significant amount of that cost is payment in lieu of notice, and that is where individuals typically, although not always, who are absent due to sickness are then dismissed from the organisation, and they have a contractual right to a notice period, but obviously it's inappropriate for them to come and work that notice period because they are off sick. So actually an amount of it is that payment, which, as I say, isn't a settlement agreement, it's a standard contractual payment where individuals are dismissed due to their sickness.
Can I just ask again, is some of that a top-up of pension for periods of in lieu of notice, therefore? So, I don't know, 18% of 3 months' salary for an individual, is that included in this figure? Or when we terminate somebody, is that the termination date and there's no additional payment for the period of notice into their pensions?
I need to come back to you on that specifically.
Okay, Councillor Capon?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask a question around the £100,000 severance package amount that then comes to council. How was that figure set? Is that something that's standard, or was it something unique to us?
So my understanding is that that was in guidance which was produced for all local government organisations, so that isn't a figure that we've come up with in terms of us as an organisation.
Okay, any further questions? No. So I think we note the report, but I'd certainly be interested in going to the training session on the settlement agreements. So if we would say yes, go ahead with it, people would attend. Yeah, I've seen a few nodding heads. Okay, so that's noted. Thank you. And then near the end now. So agenda item 13 is the review of the work programme. So can we agree the items on there? And if there's anything that you would like to raise? Yep, Councillor Gardner.
This is something that we looked at in audit and accounts. You start the work programme with the work we've carried out today. Is that actually necessary? Because it does seem a waste of time telling us what we've just done. And we removed it on audit and accounts.
Okay, I appreciate your point, but I also think we didn't have this, I don't think, at the last meeting, so I think it's just good to have it on record, what was planned, and also I think it'd be helpful for when we move forward to reflect that we've got the same reports updated. But I appreciate what you're saying, yeah. Councillor Capon?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the item for the 7th of September around home and remote working policy, I know today that we covered a bit of that in terms of flexible working, and some of the response I was picking up was that it's being looked at as part of the sort of smarter technology, etc. Is that actually going to be useful to discuss it then, or possibly to delay it, would be my personal view, because we've had a flavour of that today. Just curious.
I would agree with that. I think that is absolutely one of the policies that we will need to be looking at as part of smarter ways of working, because we need to make sure that it is fit for purpose in terms of extending more broadly working in that way. I think potentially that may apply to the health, safety and wellbeing policy for the reasons that we've talked about in terms of workstation assessment and other aspects of health, safety and wellbeing as well. And potentially lone worker policy, because again there's an impact of that where people are working at home. So all three of those will have to be looked at as part of smarter ways of working.
Yes, I think if we take them off when they're ready to be presented. I'm just conscious of time, because we want to get the smarter ways working as fast as possible. So if we've got the September meeting, I'm just thinking maybe if we could then have another meeting before the February meeting, if it's ready, the report. I mean, I'm happy to schedule it in, but I'm just if we, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just not clear what report you're referring.
So with the Smarter Working Ways project, I think for members today it's very clear that we want to get that in place as quickly as possible. So if we don't have the reports ready for the September meeting, that's absolutely fine. But I'm thinking, could we maybe have that report, or I mean, we could have a session on the smarter ways of working before the February meeting. We could call an extra one.
I think that'll depend on how quickly we roll out smarter ways of working. So obviously, is it February or March, the next meeting? March. I'm happy to give an update at the September meeting in terms of what that likely date might be, if we can do it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't want our meeting schedule to hold anything up. So yeah, it's fine. Okay. Any other? Yep, Councillor Rattigan.
Chair, through you, can I ask the committee, would it be acceptable, as I've had an invitation to attend a regional pay briefing on the 26th of March. Obviously that will come after the budget, on which the national wage will be considered through the budget. I wonder if I have your confirmation you're happy for me to attend a briefing on pay going forward, so as we know what our colleagues within the southern area are doing on pay.
Absolutely, from me. Has anybody got any objections? No.
Great, then I will inform everybody.
Enjoy your conference.
No, I'll inform everybody of the committee what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So as there will be an update from me from that meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Confidential items, I don't think there's any. No, so I think we can close the meeting now at 3:55. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.